Topic 8.5, Community Ecology Part 2, Competition and Coevolution. To help you study, I've put together a checklist that tells you exactly what you need to study in AP Bio Unit 8, and in fact, all of AP Biology. To download it, go to apbiosuccess.com/checklist. Before we get into competition and coevolution, I want to define a term that I used in the last section, and I've used throughout this series. The term is ecological niche. You can also say niche, and it's how an animal makes a living. Here we have a bunch of dinosaurs and other Mesozoic reptiles. This one is an apex predator and a scavenger. This flying reptile over here was an aerial predator and a scavenger. This, the Triceratops, was a large herbivore. Here's an omnivorous forager. This one's an omnivore. This one's an herbivore or an omnivore. This one's a small predator, and here's an herbivore, also an armored grazer. Those are various dinosaur niches. Plants have niches as well. So an oak is a sun-tolerant tree. A rhododendron is a shade-tolerant shrub. A mangrove is a salt-tolerant tree or shrub. A cactus is a desert-adapted plant. A water lily is an air-requiring aquatic plant that lives on the surface of lakes or ponds. And ivy is a climbing vine. There are other plant niches as well, but this should give you the idea. An important idea related to competition is Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. This principle states that two competing species can't coexist in the same ecological niche. Gauss did experiments with various species of paramecia. So here are two species of paramecia, one of which lives on the bottom of lakes and ponds, that's their natural habitat, and the other is a surface forager, so it swims up higher. And you can see that by the position they would take in a test tube. When these two species were combined in the same test tube, they were able to coexist just fine. Why? Because their ecological niches, their ways of making a living, were different. But when Gauss took two species that had the same ecological niche, both of them were surface foragers, and when he combined them in the same test tube, what he found was that species A outcompeted species B, which became extinct. What do we see? We see two species in the same ecological niche can't coexist. That's Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. Over long periods of time, competition can be a powerful evolutionary force. One possibility is that species become extinct. The other possibility is that the competing species evolve through natural selection to do something that's called a resource partitioning. That's exploiting different parts of the resource that they were competing for. The way that that happens is through specialization. There's selection for different kinds of traits, and that results in character displacement. That simply means differences so that each species will dominate its sub-niche more effectively. Here we have the example of a variety of shorebirds, and you can see the character displacement, the different length of the legs, the different shape of the beaks. And what that does is that it enables each bird to exploit a different part of the resource, so that the avocets aren't really competing with the ducks because they're foraging in this part of the shoreline habitat, whereas the ducks are foraging over here, and the oyster catchers are actually on the sand and the plovers are higher up on the sand. So again, character displacements are the differences, and what they wind up with is species that can effectively exploit the resource that they were formerly competing for. To make this clear, I want to offer an economic analogy, character displacement and resource partitioning in the coffee niche. So here we have three companies that live in my part of the world, and they've all evolved through competition, slight differences. Starbucks, it's the mainstream everyday coffee experience with sugary specialty drinks and snacks, seasonal offerings. That's different from Peet's, which appeals to coffee purists, really high quality beans, dark roast, more robust coffee taste. And that's different again from Phil's Coffee, which specializes in pour-overs, each cup brewed fresh to order. Customers are encouraged to customize their drinks. So again, we have three competing companies. Each is partitioning the resource for different parts of the economic market for different customers, and they've done that by evolving different characteristics. If you can apply that to animals and plants, you'll understand these concepts well. Resource partitioning can lead to what are called ecomorphs, and those are species that are morphologically adapted through their form to specific niches. So in the Caribbean islands, you have lizards that have adapted to different parts of the forest canopy. You have these very large lizards that are called crown giants, smaller ones called trunk crown, ones that live on the trunk, ones that live on the ground, and ones that live in the grass. Well, that's resource partitioning. That is all about character displacement. But what's really cool is that through convergent evolution, ecomorphs from different regions, different islands in this case, can develop similar traits. So you have crown giant lizards that can be found on Cuba, Jamaica, the island of Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, but they're not closely related to one another. They evolve these traits independently through convergent evolution. And that's true of the trunk crown lizards, the ones that live in the trunk ground, and the grass bush. And this relates to a really cool case study from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute that most AP biology students experience, and now you'll understand it better. Your success in AP Biology starts here. Are you struggling with AP Bio? With learn-biology.com, students get the skills and confidence to be a top student and earn 4s and 5s on the AP Bio exam, guaranteed. Go to learn-biology.com to find out how you can master your biology course and crush the AP Bio exam. Here's a really interesting data set that could show up on the AP Bio exam or in your course related to beak depth in the Galápagos finches. Here are 3 of the Galápagos finch species that live on the Galápagos Islands, which are off the coast of Ecuador. The character that's been quantified here is the beak depth, the distance between here and here in the beak. Different size beaks are adaptations for exploiting different types of food. Here is what's going on. On islands where these birds live together, they're all inhabiting the same island, note that there's no overlap in terms of the beak depth. That's true of island set A and island set B. On island set C, that involves Floriana and San Cristobal, one of the bird species, G. magnorostris, is absent, but note that there's no overlap between bird species G. fulginosa and the other bird species G. fortis. But on these really small islands, Cuatro Hermanos over here and Daphne Mayor over here, only one bird species is present. And with only one bird species, note the overlap in beak depth. What I'd like you to do is try and explain that. So pause the video and see if you can come up with an explanation. On island set A and B over here, there are 3 species that are coexisting, and competition between those 3 is leading to niche partitioning, and adaptation to different types of food is leading to character displacement. So there's no overlap in the beak depth. We have the much larger beaks over here, the medium-sized, and the smaller size over here. On island set C, one of the species, G. magnorostris, is missing, but because there's still competition between these two species, G. fulginosa and G. fortis, there is character displacement and there's no beak depth overlap. On the smallest islands, D and E, there's only one species. And without competition, with no competition between different species, character displacement decreases. The beak depths overlap. So here we have a kind of natural historical validation of these ideas related to character displacement and resource partitioning. Another concept related to competition is the difference between a fundamental niche and a realized niche. A fundamental niche is the range of resources that a species could exploit in the absence of competition. A realized niche is the range of resources that a species actually does exploit in the competitive context in which it lives. An interesting natural history study was done in the intertidal zone involving two species of barnacles. That's a kind of crustacean that lives on the rocks of the intertidal zone. Here's species A, which lives closer to the high tide line. Here's species B, which lives closer to the low tide line. If species B is removed, which you can do by scraping these barnacles off the rock, notice how species A expands into the low tide zone where species B was living. But if species A is removed, species B pretty much stays where it is. So your task is for species A and B to compare their fundamental and realized niches. Pause the video, do that, and then go on. For species A, the fundamental niche is much wider than its realized niche. How do we know that? Because when species B is removed, species A is capable of colonizing this zone over here that's much closer to the low tide zone. Species B, by comparison, has a fundamental niche that's pretty much the same as its realized niche. And how do we know that? Because when species A is removed, species B is incapable of expanding into this zone over here, closer to the high tide line. Species B can outcompete species A, but it can't live in the area where species A is predominant. That's the difference between a fundamental niche and a realized niche. Let's end this discussion of symbiosis by talking about evolutionary arms races. These are positive feedback loops where adaptations in one species lead to counter adaptations in the second species, and they're associated with predation, parasitism, and herbivory. They result in extreme adaptations related to speed, sensing, camouflage, defensive and offensive weaponry. That can be physical weaponry or chemical weaponry. Why is a cheetah capable of running 60 miles an hour? Well, it's because the cheetah's speed has selected its prey for speed. And as the prey have evolved to become faster, that's caused a counter adaptation in the cheetahs, which has caused them to become faster. This obviously doesn't go on forever because there are physical and physiological limits. But when you see an amazing adaptation, it probably stems from an evolutionary arms race. Why is this insect so incredibly well camouflaged? Because there's some predator on the end which has incredible visual acuity. Why is this crocodile or alligator so incredibly well camouflaged in the water where it's swimming? Because on the other end, there's a prey organism which has acute hearing and acute vision. And so the alligator has evolved counter adaptations. And so it goes in the amazing pageant of life that we call biology. Here are your next moves for AP Bio success. Please subscribe to learn-biology.com and please watch this next video.